Good morning. Today's demonstration will focus on how Microsoft Dynamics GP users can benefit from PN3's paperless transaction processing. We'll cover paperless purchase requests and purchase orders, vendor invoices that are linked to your purchase orders, non-PO vendor invoices, expense reports, payment requests, as well as reconciling your credit card transactions. You'll see from today's demonstration that PN3 will provide your organization with the ability to have timely approval of transactions, the ability to track all of your transactions because they're electronic, eliminating a lot of redundant, repetitive processes, guaranteeing adherence to your organization's internal controls, the ability to share payment information with staff that are not Dynamics GP users, eliminating the need for paper-based files, and the ability to respond much faster to auditors' requests for information. Let's transition into the demonstration now. I am currently logged in as Mary Jones, a manager. We're in the PN3 for purchase requisition system. You'll see that PN3 is a web-based application, which means there's no software that has to be loaded on a user's workstation. PN3 is offered as an on-premises solution installed internally on your servers or as a cloud solution. Mary would like to submit a purchase request to get approval to purchase some items. There are two ways that Mary can do that. She can open up the blank requisition form by selecting New Requisition, and she can fill this form out. She can hit Add Rows if she wants to put in her items. So I can open up a blank form to start a requisition as a user. Well, we also, again, to improve process efficiencies, we give staff the ability to generate new requisitions from some of their earlier purchase orders. So Mary has the ability also to say, I want to generate a new request from a previous PO. I'm just going to select one of Mary's previous POs. It opens up the old PO in a new requisition form. It'll show Mary all of the items in that requisition. Mary has the ability to delete some of the items in this new requisition, edit some of the items, or add new items. Mary says, I'd like to place the exact same order with this vendor Streamline, but let me change my requested delivery date. So we're going to make it, let's say, 9/10/2017. When Mary's finished, she also, as you can see, has the ability to put in delivery instructions and comments, but Mary says, that's what I want. So she saves her requisition. Mary has now saved her requisition into her PN3 task list. And now that she's saved the requisition, she has a couple of options. If Mary has supporting documents, maybe vendor quotes, other justification documents, she can select Add Documents, and she can attach supporting documents to any requisition. Mary comes down and reviews her requisition again. And she says, you know what? Let me check to see what impact this is going to have on my budget. So Mary can select Budget Info. PN3 will drill down. It will show the budget information in Dynamics GP, what's already committed, the balance right now, what's already pending approval, and what the balance will be if all pending transactions are approved. So this helps Mary see real time the impact that this request to purchase will have on her budget. Mary says, okay, I'd like to proceed. Now, you'll see that Mary's set up as a manager in PN3 that says Mary can approve her purchase request. However, in this particular demonstration, to give you a feel for the internal controls, we've set up Mary as a manager with an approval limit of $1,000. This request is for $22,750. Therefore, when Mary approves it, because it exceeds her approval limit, it's going to automatically route to her manager, Susan. By the way, we also give you the ability to set up users that don't have any approval authority, and anything they create will have to be routed to a manager for action. So again, I'm going to approve this as Mary. Because it exceeds Mary's approval limit, it will automatically route to Mary's manager, Susan. Mary approves it, off it goes to Susan, and now I'm going to sign out as Mary, and I'm going to sign back in as Susan. Susan, by the way, would have received an email alert to let her know that there's an invoice in PN3 awaiting her action. I sign in as Susan. Here's the requisition. Susan opens it up. Now, just like Mary could see it, Susan can now review the details of the requisition. If there were supporting documents attached, she'd be able to see those documents. She can also look into the audit trail or the request processing milestones to see that Mary approved it and the date and time that Mary approved it. If Susan has a question for Mary before deciding what action to take, she can put in a note and send that communication to Mary, and any communication that Susan and Mary have related to processing this transaction will be permanently linked to this transaction. So I can not only see who approved it and when, but any communication or discussion that took place while the transaction was being processed. Susan says, all right, I really think I'm good at approving this. So Susan's going to approve it. Susan's approval limit is $25,000. So it will not have to route to Susan's manager. It's going to route back to Mary as a fully approved requisition. Or if you have a more centralized process, you can route transactions to your purchasing team as well. I'm going to approve this, and because it's within Susan's approval limit, it routes back to Mary, and Mary gets an email alert informing her that her purchase request has been approved. So I'm going to sign out as Susan, and I'm going to sign back in now as Mary. The requisition is now in Mary's task list. So Mary opens it up. Now, when Mary reviews the requisition, she can see that it's been approved by Susan. And she knows that it's fully approved and that she can generate her purchase order because now there's a Generate Purchase Order button. Mary selects that. PN3 will assign a PO number to this transaction. Mary now has her PO number. If she wants to get the PO to the vendor, she can generate a PDF of this PO. The PDFs that you generate of purchase orders can include your logos, your terms and conditions, and Mary can then send this PDF to the vendor to place your order. And now that the order is placed, at some point, the vendor is going to start to fulfill the order and will ultimately invoice against this purchase order. When the invoice comes in, it's also important that AP, in not only checking pricing, can confirm that the items against the PO have been received. So we give staff the ability to go in and receive items against a purchase order. By the way, one thing I wanted to mention is that this item code is an optional field. It's not required. Sometimes what you're ordering are services, and you don't have necessarily an item code. You might simply have a description of the services. But that's permitted as well. It's not a required field in PN3 unless you configure PN3 to make it required. But now I can receive items against this purchase order. I can hit Receive All if I received everything in one shipment, but I can also come in and say I received 3 of these, 4 of these, 2 of these, and I can specify what I've received against an open PO. And you'll see in a few seconds how we use this data when we're processing invoices against purchase orders. So let me close this for a second, and I'm going to log into PN3 for payables so we can process an invoice against a purchase order. I'm logging in as an AP user, and we're going to talk about the various ways that you can get invoices into PN3. One of the ways is if I have an individual invoice, I can select New Invoice. I can select Import File. I'm just going to browse to a file that I know I have that has a purchase order link to it. So let me go, and I'm going to pull in this file from this vendor streamline. It says now I have this invoice referencing PO number 150. So I'm going to first tell PN3 who's my vendor. By the way, the vendor information in PN3 are your active vendors in Dynamics GP. So we have an active link. There's no need for you to import or export any files. If the vendor's active in Dynamics GP, you'll see the vendor in PN3. I'm going to see if I can find PO number 150. I see it. It's an open PO, so I select it. And when I do that, it pulls back all of the information that's pertinent about this purchase order. All of the items I ordered, the description, the quantity. It shows the pricing. So I can compare this pricing in my PO with the pricing that's in my invoice. It also lets me know what's been received against the PO. And we build in three-way match validations against this item, or the items, in this purchase order. So it allows you to really streamline the process of processing invoices against a purchase order. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we also give you the ability to process non-PO invoices in PN3. And so I want to show you the various ways that we can get invoices into PN3, whether they're tied to a purchase order or not. We have a module in PN3 called our eCapture module. This is for invoices that you're going to be receiving from vendors via email. We ask our clients, if they don't already have one, to create an email account dedicated to the receipt of vendor invoices. Maybe you'll call it invoices at your domain, or payables, or AP, whatever you'd like to call it is fine. We configure PN3 to monitor that email account. Let your vendors know that we'd like you to send all of our invoices, instead of traditional mail, send them to us as PDF files to the email account that you've created. PN3 monitors that email account, and when we see an email come in with a single PDF file attached or multiple PDF files attached, we grab each PDF and we pull it into AP. So you don't have to log in, save attachments. We grab the PDF. We also give you the ability, because we know that different vendors have different layouts of their own individual invoices, we give you the ability in your PN3 setup to tell PN3 where each vendor places their invoice number, their invoice date, and their invoice amount. And you can see here that we can grab that data off of the invoice. So not only is there no envelope to open, no paper to scan, it also reduces your data entry effort. If this is a non-PO invoice, I can simply say, I want to send this invoice to this user, Mary Jones. If it's a PO invoice, I can link the invoice to the PO to determine what my next steps would be. I'm going to say I want to send this on. So I hit save and upload, off this invoice goes, and it now presents the next invoice. So this is a very efficient way of getting invoices into your workflow without having to deal with any paper when vendors are sending invoices to you via email. And most of our clients tell us that after reaching out to their vendors, they get about 50 to 60% of their invoices via email. Now, in addition to eCapture, we also have the ability to scan a batch of invoices directly into PN3. So if you have a scanner connected to your workstation, you can scan directly in. If you don't, you can go to a high-speed scanner in your office, scan there, and import invoices into PN3. We also give you the ability to easily reconcile credit card charges by importing those charges. And then lastly, we also give you the ability to import invoices from a spreadsheet. Now, back to processing an individual invoice. You saw me earlier say I had a new invoice when I was doing a PO invoice, but I selected import file. This time, I'm going to say I want to scan it. I have a small scanner connected to my laptop, and I place the invoice into the feeder of that scanner. So when I hit start scan, it's going to scan this invoice in and create an image of this invoice that I can use to submit this invoice for approval. So this is going to be a non-PO invoice. We did a PO invoice earlier. This invoice, we need to route to Mary. I'm going to first tell PN3 who my vendor is. Again, these are the active vendors in Dynamics GP. I select my vendor. I'm going to also come over and I'm going to tell PN3 what my invoice number is. I can type in or select my invoice date from a calendar. I'm going to put in my invoice amount. And I'm going to say I want to send this invoice to Mary also. Now, if I wanted to, I could hit add coding and I could code this invoice when I send it to Mary, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to send it uncoded and let Mary code it as part of the approval process. We give you the flexibility of processing your invoices either way. I'm going to hit save and upload. You're going to see the page refresh, and I'm going to get confirmation that this invoice was captured today, 9/1 at 8:40 by Pamela Hood, and it's been routed to Mary Jones. Mary will get an email alert informing her that there's an invoice in PN3 awaiting her action. So I'm going to sign out now as Pamela, the AP user, and I'm going to sign in as Mary Jones, the manager. The email alert that Mary gets has a link to this invoice. I'm sorry, has a link to this login screen, I should say. So Mary then logs in, and we present to her what we call her PN3 task list. Most clients call it their PN3 inbox. These are all of the transactions awaiting Mary's action. This last one is the one that we just routed to Mary. So Mary opens it up, and she takes a look at the transaction. Now, the benefit is that Mary could be anywhere. She could be in the office, working from home, on business travel. She can do this from any device, PC, tablet, smartphone. Mary says, all right, here's the invoice. I'd like to approve this. If Mary receives this and she decides that it's really not hers, if she wants to, she can hit route, and she can route it back to AP or send it to another staff person. But Mary says, I'd like to approve this. Now, in this particular demonstration, we've set up PN3 to say, if a user's processing a non-PO invoice and they attempt to approve it without first trying to code it, we want to let them know that coding is required. So it gives Mary a message that she has to code it before she can approve it. Not all of our clients use this rule, but quite a few do. So Mary says, okay, I'm sorry, I forgot. I'll code the invoice now. Mary selects add new coding. Just like your vendor information from Dynamics GP is in PN3, your chart of accounts data is as well. Now, in this demonstration, we're displaying it as a string. Some clients like to see the valid Dynamics GP combinations. Other clients prefer to have a separate segment or a separate field for each segment. You'll see that we always show the numeric values and the description. I can search by the numeric value, but I can also search by the description as well. Now, in this particular example, I'm just going to create a single line of coding equal to the transaction amount. But I can create as many lines as I need. So if I need to put in 20, 30, 40, 50 lines, I can do that. PN3 will just run a validation that the sum of the lines equals the transaction amount. We also give you the ability to configure PN3 to limit the codes to particular users. So if I don't want all users to see my full chart of accounts, you have the ability to control it that way as well. Now, if you recall, Mary is a manager, but her approval limit's only $1,000. So when Mary approves this transaction, instead of routing to AP, because it exceeds her approval limit, it will automatically route to her manager, Susan. Mary approves it, off it goes, and now Susan has it, and we show Mary the next transaction that was in her PN3 inbox. So it just queues up the transactions one at a time so Mary can efficiently take action on all of her transactions. Let's log out now as Mary, and I'm going to log back in as Susan. Susan has this invoice that Mary just approved. So Susan opens it up. By the way, Susan would have received an email alert. This last invoice in Susan's task list is the one that Mary just approved. So Susan opens it up. Susan can see the invoice. Susan can also see in the invoice processing milestones, your audit trail, that Mary approved the invoice today at 8:44. Susan can check the coding. As Mary's manager, if she wants to edit the coding, she can certainly do that. She can also drill down if she wants to see what impact it might have on her budget. Susan says, everything looks good, I'm going to approve this. Susan's approval limit is $25,000. It exceeds the $10,000 invoice amount. So when Susan approves it, it will route to AP as a fully approved transaction. There are some exception processing rules that we can give you the ability to set up that would, in some cases, say maybe this has to go to some other specific users as required approvers as well. But in this case, it's going to go back to AP when Susan approves it. So Susan approves it. It's now gone back to AP. So I'm going to sign out as Susan, and I'm going to sign back in as Pamela, one of our AP processors. Pamela now has the invoice. It's fully approved. We know that because the status of the invoice now says manager approved. Expand this so we can see more of the invoice. So Pamela reviews it. As the AP processor, she wants to check the coding, make sure the coding's right. But when Pamela's ready and she wants to get this invoice into Dynamics GP, all she has to do after confirming that everything's okay is hit approve. When she does that, PN3 will look into Dynamics GP to see if Pamela has a batch open for the period that this invoice is going to. If she does, when she approves it, it automatically puts the invoice in that batch. If she doesn't have a batch open for the period that this invoice is going to, PN3 will create a batch on Pamela's behalf in Dynamics GP automatically. Key point I want to make here is that there's no files that you have to export or import. It's going to do it seamlessly. It's going to create your transaction in Dynamics GP in the appropriate batch. Very important point there. All right, so we've talked so far in payables about PO invoices, non-PO invoices. I'm going to also talk about a few other transactions. I'm going to log back in here as Mary Jones. In PN3, we also have, in PN3 for payables, I should say, we have two electronic forms. One is called the payment request form. The other is called the expense report form. So if I'm a staff person and I have out-of-pocket expenses that I need to be reimbursed for, I can open up the expense report form. We give you the ability to link users to their vendor information, and then they can come into PN3 and fill out their expense report. So maybe I say, you know, I need to do my August expense report. I can come in and put in a date range, so I can say I had expenses from August the 1st through August the 31st. And then I can enter in my expenses. So I can say, for example, on August the 1st, maybe I had a trip to Boston. This is a drop-down list that you control. You can even link these expense categories to accounts in Dynamics GP. So I can say this is my airfare, and I traveled via United Airlines, and I can put in the amount. I'm going to select any codes here, but as you can see, I can code that expense line. I can save it. I can hit add here to attach supporting documents. If I have receipts, I can attach that. I could also say, for example, I have another expense line, let's say on August the 3rd, and maybe it's my lodging expense. And I stayed at a Hyatt, and I can put in the cost for that, change my coding probably as appropriate, but again, just for the sake of time, I'm going to save that. I'm going to hit add, and I can attach that receipt. So you can attach receipts to any of the line items. You can also put in mileage. So I can say I had to travel using my own vehicle on August the 8th, You'll notice when I select the date, it puts in the rate. You will control the reimbursement rate for a given date range. So I can then put in my miles. After doing that, it's going to calculate the amount. So staff don't have to remember what rate is applicable for a given date range. You will have that set up in PN3, and when they select the date, it puts in the rate and therefore the amount. So this gives staff the ability to do expense reports online, save those expense reports if they want to, come back and add to them later, and when they're ready, they would submit their expense report for approval. Managers are not able to approve their own expense reports to give you an internal control as it relates to expense reports. Once fully approved, the expense reports are then routed to AP for review. Now, in addition to the expense report form, there's also the payment request form. The payment request form can be used in cases where a staff person says, I need to get a payment to a vendor, or maybe it's an internal cash advance, but I need to get a payment to a vendor. I don't have an invoice, and I'm not going to get one. If I have an invoice or I know the invoice is coming in, I'm not going to use the payment request form. But maybe I need to get a deposit to a vendor as an example. So I can select the vendor. This, again, is a drop-down that you control. So I could say this is going to be a vendor deposit, and I need to try to get the payment by September the 22nd. And then I can come in and I can put in a description of what this is for, the amount of the deposit. I can code it. Again, I'm just going to select any codes here. I can attach supporting documents. If I had to put in another line, I can. But this payment request form is ideal, again, when you need to get payment to a vendor, you don't have an invoice, and you're not going to get an invoice. Instead of trying to introduce an invoice that you create into the process, the payment request form is ideal for that purpose. Let's come out of that. There's also in PN3, I mentioned the ability to reconcile credit card charges. So we also have a credit card form in PN3. We can import staff's credit card charges, and then they can come in. It will show the date of the charge, the supplier. They can see the amount. They can code it. They can put in additional descriptions. You can attach supporting documents. So it's a very efficient way of reconciling your credit card charges. We also give staff the ability to, based upon how you set up your security, to search for transactions. So if I'm curious if an invoice has been paid for a particular vendor, as long as how you have set up security gives me access to the invoice, I can come in and pull it up. So for example, I say I want to see if an invoice for this vendor that goes back into July has been paid. I can put in a date range search. Again, I can use any of these fields to search for invoices. I'm saying this is the vendor, this is my date range, but I can use any of these fields to search. I can see all invoices tied to a PO, all invoices in a particular batch. But I want to see if an invoice in this date range has been approved and paid, and I don't know the invoice number, so I'm pulling back every invoice in this date range for this vendor. When I hit search, it brings back every invoice. I open it up. I see AP approved. That tells me that the invoice is in Dynamics GP. I come over here to my payment fields. It shows me that it was paid via ACH. This is the payment number, and this is the date that the payment was processed. So you can see this gives staff the ability to, without having to call accounting or call AP, the ability to check on the status of their own transactions. Now, one of the things that we wanted to see also was reports. So I'm in PN3 for purchase requisitions again. In PN3 for purchase requisitions, we have open PO report, open requisitions, budget report, idle transactions. So any of these reports can be used to check on where things stand and what's going on in the system. Now, there's also a series of AP reports. I'm going to log back in as an AP user, Pamela. And there are a lot of AP reports that help AP manage your PN3 workflows. There's an accrual report, a check signers report, contract report, An open invoices report, kind of looking over the ones that we know are used quite often. So again, these reports allow you to manage the PN3 workflow. Now, I hope this particular demonstration has given you a pretty good understanding of some of the functionality in PN3. I haven't covered everything, but I have covered quite a bit. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have or conduct a demonstration for your organization. Thank you, and have a great day.